Welcome to the Blueprint Podcast, where we throw out the old blueprints so you can become who you were always meant to be. I'm your host, Jason Smith, and if you haven't already, make sure you click the subscribe button and share this podcast with your friends on social media and tag me in it at JBirdFit. Today, I have a very special guest for you, Amy Morin. Amy is a renowned psychotherapist, mental strength coach, and the award-winning host of the Mentally Stronger with Therapist Amy Morin podcast. She is an international best-selling author known for her books including 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do, which have sold over 1 million copies and been translated into more than 45 languages. Hailed by The Guardian as the self-help guru of the moment, she has been recognized by Forbes as a thought leader star, and her book was named one of the top 20 must-reads of all time by People. Her TEDx talk, The Secret to Becoming Mentally Strong, has become one of the most watched talks in history with over 24 million views. Amy currently resides on a sailboat in the Florida Keys, embracing a unique and inspiring lifestyle. Amy Morin, welcome to the Blueprint Podcast. Do you have any questions for me before we get started?
Who's your audience primarily?
Oh man, it's a huge mix. It's interesting because as a former first responder, people have attached to that part of who I am. So I bring an element of that. And then I started talking about relationships and attachment styles and all that stuff because of what I witnessed in crime scene. And when you're doing crime scene, you see the letters that get left behind by so many people. You begin to realize that a big challenge for them is just I'm not enough, or
Right.
I've done something so egregious that I'm never going to be forgiven. The challenge seems so insurmountable that they don't see another way out of it.
Yep.
And so you start to figure, why is this
Right.
happening? And then
Right.
as you read the letters, it's I've felt that way too.
Yeah.
And then that kind of messes with you a little bit because you start to come to some of your own personal realities and like things from your childhood come up and you start having all these
Uh-huh.
different experiences and you're like, shoot, this is not what I thought my life was. So you find all this new information, you start reading all the books behind me and stuff like that and trying to figure out why people do the things that they do. And for me, I narrowed it down to a lot of it is our interpersonal relationships. It comes down to relationship challenges. And I think that's why relationship content overall is so popular.
Right.
But there's also a lot of bad advice out there
Yep.
about relationships, and we always seem to skip over the relationship that you have with yourself, which is really a huge part of it, and I think we're seeing that a lot now. This is a great segue into how I wanted to get started, but I love that your work focuses on mental strength, and your story is quite literally the example of what resilience looks like. And I think after the past week, everybody needs to go out and buy all of your books. If they haven't already, you need to go do that. And what I'm really curious about is what inspired you to dive deep into this area and how has your own personal journey shaped your experiences? And I don't want you to give your whole TED talk. Just
Right.
introduce people to who you are. And she does have a TED talk, by the way. So you guys should go listen to that.
So I'm a therapist by trade. Thought, oh, I learned all this cool stuff in college and I'm going to teach everybody all the things that I learned out of my textbooks. But I lost my mom when I was 23. And then on the 3-year anniversary of the day my mom died, I lost my 26-year-old husband to a heart attack. And as I went through those losses, I realized that the textbook knowledge I had, and even though I was a therapist, it really left me unprepared for the reality of what it was like to go through those things and to grieve. So I started my own journey on learning about mental strength and learned a lot more from my own experiences than I did in college and figured out, okay, it's not always about what you do. Sometimes it's about what you don't do. If you don't have certain bad habits, you can stay strong even when you're going through tough times. And wrote an article called 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do, and it went viral. 50 million people read it, and I got invited to write a book after that. So I've now written 6 books, and I get to still speak about mental strength on a daily basis because that article resonated with so many people. I think a lot of people were also looking for how do you stay mentally strong during tough times, and it's not something that we were ever taught in school or anything like that.
I think a lot of what pulls us in this opposite direction of being that happy, healthy, wealthy, and figure that we all aspire to be is that lack of resilience and that emotional strength that maybe we didn't learn when we were younger, or it just feels like there's a skills gap in there somewhere.
There is, and so many people talk about emotional intelligence, like, you're supposed to guess what the other person is feeling and then manage your own emotions around that. But I'll give a talk to these really smart room full of executives, and I'll say, "I'm gonna give you 30 seconds to write down as many feeling words as you can." They average about 5. Like, we don't even have the vocabulary to
Yeah.
identify how we're feeling, let alone guess how somebody else is feeling and then change the way that we're communicating based on that. And it's no wonder why. Like, nobody teaches us this, and I don't know why. When we're 7, they teach you lots of things about math, and that's great, but you could be the best at math in the world, but if you can't control your temper or you don't know how to deal with sadness or anxiety, you're still not gonna go on and be as successful as you could be. So I think it's really important sometimes that we step back. I wrote a book for kids, and a lot of the parents will say, I'm learning all this at the same time as I'm teaching this to my child.
Right.
And I don't blame anybody. In my house, we didn't really talk about feelings. At school, we didn't talk about feelings. It wasn't anything that anybody showed us how to do. Or what do you do when you're doubting yourself? Basic stuff that nobody teaches us.
It's not just that, it's also the grief that so many of us feel throughout our lifetime, and we're not taught to actually look at the different stages of our life and allow ourselves to go through that process of grief of, well, I'm no longer a young kid, I'm moving into a teenager. You can grieve that a little bit, and then you're into your 20s and you're about to graduate college and your teen years are behind you. There's a little bit of grief with that on top of all the other experiences that you're having in between that with the loss and the challenges that you're facing throughout that time, and nobody really sits you down to help you navigate that. You feel like you're almost emotionally abandoned and on your own trying to do all of that.
That's just it. In my therapy office, it's filled with people all day long who are like, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this way. I shouldn't be struggling with this.
I
Nobody else.
shouldn't be. Yeah.
And then they'll say, nobody else even knows I'm dealing with this, but it's weird that I'm struggling so much with, and it might be just that, like I left behind my 20s. What they don't know is the last 5 people in my office, we're talking about very similar struggles, and we all experience the same emotions, but we don't talk about it. And we have this idea that, yeah, you should be happy all the time. And one of the biggest things about resilience is I think people feel pressure to bounce back. So they go through something traumatic on a Tuesday, and by Friday, they're like, no, I'm good. And they don't realize that, like, part of healing and part of being resilient is about allowing yourself to feel a whole wide range of emotions. And just saying, no, I'm good and I'm fine doesn't mean that you're mentally strong. It's more like you're acting tough. And those are two very different things. And I'm seeing so many people who feel like they have to act like they're not scarred, or that idea that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. No, sometimes you go through really hard stuff and it leaves you fairly traumatized. And that doesn't mean you're a weak person, but we've all been taught something different, that there's a badge of honor in saying, no, I'm good all the time, even when we're not.
Yeah. What might acting tough actually look or sound like?
So for a lot of people, it's when they say things like, I don't have any anxiety. I'm not scared of anything. You should,
Fine.
right. Never quit, never fail. The only way that you ever fail in life is if you give up. And my attitude is we should be quitting things more often. If you start
Yeah.
something and it's bad for your mental health, it takes a lot of courage to walk away. Or if you set a goal and then you decide this isn't worth it anymore, it's not in line with my values, take a break from it. But a lot of times it's our pride and our ego that gets in the way of being able to do those things.
Yeah, a big part of it is knowing when to pivot. So many times we put our, and I've done this myself, you put yourself in a position and you're like, this is all I've ever known. This is what I've been doing since whenever. And this is the job that I'm dedicated to because I have to do this job because I don't know how to do anything else, not recognizing that it's actually this huge burden and it's been this massive challenge to be able to overcome. And you're constantly in this state of trying to overcome all these challenges. And if you would just pivot or maybe sidestep or lean into a little bit more of who you are as a person and what you enjoy, you just might find an alternative path around those challenges that you've been experiencing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think sometimes we fall into these labels of, I'm supposed to be the smart one, so therefore I can't become a creator. Or I've always been labeled as the free spirit. So if I have a 9 to 5 job, people won't know what to do with me, or it doesn't fit with who I see that I am. So a lot of times people are worried about changing and evolving and personal growth because they're afraid that they aren't being authentic. When in reality, like, your true self might be somebody that experiments with lots of different things.
Yeah. It's really hard because you have to reveal yourself to yourself. So, how do we start doing that?
Sometimes it's just about taking a step back and saying, like, what do I believe about myself? And when we get into those shoulds and should nots, you can peel back some layers by saying, what would that mean? So if I think I really should go to that thing that I don't want to go to, if I didn't, what would that mean? It means I'm a bad person. Does it really mean that? Maybe I'm just somebody who's taking charge of my time. So just by asking ourselves those questions sometimes, what would that mean if I didn't do that? Or what would it mean if I branched out a little bit? Sometimes we can then uncover, the fears that we have. People would judge me, or they'd think I was a bad person, or I'd be afraid that would mean I'm not a nice person if I don't say yes to that thing that I don't want to do. What would that mean if you weren't a nice person? It would mean that I'm not a good human being. Does that really mean that? And so sometimes just asking ourselves some questions like that can help us figure out, all right, what are the fears that I have that cause me to behave in a certain way?
Yeah, there's so much obligation that I think that we feel to not only the people around us, but just in all the different spaces that we go into throughout our daily life. And we're constantly looking at other people to validate us in some way, shape, or form, or confirm our existence or the thoughts, feelings, and emotions that we're having without really questioning them for ourselves to say, do I believe this to be true? Is this who I really am? And can you step confidently into your own frame?
Yeah, and it's a matter of if I start to behave differently, the people around me get a little bit ruffled too, right? So
Oh,
then
big
they're like,
time.
right? And
Yeah.
so I grew up incredibly shy. So my sister always spoke for me. She's a couple years older than I am. To this day, if we're in a restaurant and I like need to ask for another glass of water, she'll still ask it for me and then she'll laugh and be like, "I forget, you can speak now." But to step outside of those roles, the people around us will raise an eyebrow. They'll wonder, "Have you lost your mind? What's going on here?" And so that's again why it takes a while to figure out, no, this is me. I'm changing and I'm evolving and other people can handle it, but I also have to be comfortable with doing things differently.
So, how does it make you feel when she says, "I forget you can speak now"?
It's interesting because
Does it feel like a dig?
no, like, I actually get where she's coming from because I could
Yeah.
also fall into that trap of letting her speak for me, and I'll have to remember, "Hey, Amy, you gave a TED Talk that been viewed by 24 million people. You could
Right?
probably order your own glass of water at the restaurant," but it's like an old habit that dies hard, and then when I'm around people that knew me back then, it's like I just could easily go back to the seven-year-old who doesn't do those things again. It's very interesting.
At the same time, it's nice that you have somebody that's willing to take care of you in that way and recognize that, "Hey, that's a need that you have. I'm gonna go ahead and fulfill
Right,
that for you."
right.
So, in your book, you've written about the 13 things that mentally strong people don't do. Which one do you think is the hardest to overcome, especially during challenging times like the holidays?
I think probably number 2, which is that mentally strong people don't give away their power. And that one is really about just owning your time, owning your feelings, owning your energy, because it's so tempting to be like, the uncle that has to complain about politics ruined the entire holiday for everybody. Did they, or did you let them ruin the holiday? Or somebody's wasting my time, or so and so makes me feel bad about myself. And of course, when we get back together with family and there's all these things about holidays and the pressures of how we're going to spend it and who it's going to be with, sometimes we think that we aren't doing all of these things about living up to the ideal that we wanted to have. And it just gets really easy to blame other people for, again, ruining your time, wasting your day, all of those things that we can take personal responsibility for.
And why do you think it is that we find ourselves giving our power away to others so often?
I'd rather think that you ruined my day than that I ruined my day. Because then I have to wake up and say, tomorrow again, I have a choice. How am I going to spend my time? How am I going to feel about myself? So sometimes it's just easier to blame other people. And then we forget, like, oh, I have to go to that holiday gathering. You don't have
You
to.
don't have to.
It's a
Yeah.
choice. And maybe the consequence is your family would be upset and you don't want to upset them. So you think, all right, I can go hang out for 2 hours or make it worth it, but, like, just changing your language sometimes is incredibly powerful and recognizing that you have choices, but, again, it just becomes so much easier to blame other people so that we don't have to take that personal responsibility.
But how can we recognize that we actually do have the freedom of choice? Because I think for so many people, it certainly doesn't feel that way. And a lot of it is that we're stuck in this pattern that we've been living over and over again. And just how do you begin to escape that?
So I think it's about waking up in the morning and saying, "What am I gonna choose to do today? How am I gonna choose how to spend my time, who I'm gonna spend it with?" And even if you have a job you don't like, it's a choice to go to that job, and you might be thinking, "No, I have to earn that money." It's not a choice. It is. The consequence would be if you don't go to work, you don't get a paycheck, and perhaps
Right.
the consequences are worse than going to a bad job. So, part of it is just asking yourself those questions. What do I choose to do today? And if I didn't choose to do it, what would the consequences be? And why am I choosing to do this? Okay, I'm going to that thing that I don't want to do, but here's why.
I think a lot of it comes down to our trust of self. We don't trust ourselves to be able to
Right.
make healthy decisions for ourselves. And how can we begin to help people navigate that decision making process so that they can start looking at things a little bit more objectively and say, you know what, actually, this isn't for me. And here's 10 reasons why it's not for me.
So many things we can do, but it can be simple things. Sometimes just pause and ask yourself, like, how do I feel right now? Naming an emotion is super important, but again, we struggle with it. So sometimes I'll work with people and we'll print out a really simple list of feeling words and you hang it on your bathroom mirror. When you're brushing your teeth in the morning, you just look at it and say, how do I feel today? Because your emotions affect your judgment. If you're anxious about something, and it might be about your grandmother's health. You go to work and your boss says, "Hey, do you want to take on this new task?" Your anxiety spills over and you're likely to say, "No, thank you." So it's important to recognize, how am I feeling today and how might that affect my decisions? And then we make our best decisions when our emotions are in balance with our rational thinking. But as our emotions go up, rational thinking goes down. So you want to balance that out. So one way to raise your logic can just be to take out a piece of paper and write down the pros and cons of doing something versus flip the paper over and write down the pros and cons of not doing something. And when you see it on paper, you get it out of your head again, then you can think a little bit more logically. Another strategy is you just say, "What would I say to my friend right now?" Takes a lot of the emotion out of it. You probably give your friend really good advice of, "Hey, you know what you should do right now?" But our emotions and everything else gets all clouded and it's hard to think clearly sometimes. So just say, "What would I say to my friend right now?" And then take your own advice. I think when we start practicing those 3 things, if we become better in tune with our emotions, if we work on making sure our logic and our emotions are in balance, and then we just ask ourselves, what advice would I give to somebody else? I think we start to make wiser decisions. And then when we do that, like, we get more confident. Okay, I can make
Mm.
an okay choice. And then you start to trust yourself more over time.
I think that's one of the most powerful exercises that you can do. And I always phrase it like this, where you're telling them, if you had a friend that you love dearly, that you really cared about, that you've been friends with for your entire life, and you want to see the best for them, what advice would you give to them?
Yeah.
And when you say it like that, it's just like you watch their shoulders drop and they relax and they're just like, you're right. And
Yeah.
then they start to dive into it and they realize, I do have freedom of choice. I can do this.
And we're so much kinder to other people. If your friend
Oh,
messed up at work,
100%.
they made a mistake and they called you up and said, "Oh, listen to what I did today." You wouldn't be like, "Hey, stupid, you always mess up. You can't ever do anything right." We'd be like, "Oh, that's okay. We all make mistakes. You'll do better tomorrow." If we just treated ourselves with that same kind of compassion, I think then we would feel like, "Okay, I'm capable of making a good decision here and I'm going to make a good choice."
I think you've brought up the workplace twice now, and I've got a good question around that where it's like, how do we say no to things that we don't want to do in the workplace without putting our jobs in jeopardy? It was something that I had to learn. I didn't realize that you could say no, but I was watching people all the time around me saying, no, I'm actually not doing that. And I'm like, how are you doing that and not getting fired? I don't understand.
It's tough because what happens is we get praised for taking on extra tasks. "Oh, give it to this person because 'cause they'll always do it. She always gets her work done." What they don't know is maybe you're working an extra 20 hours outside of the office too, but we love that when we get the praise and admiration for it. And the more we say yes, the more stuff people keep handing us because they think, "You can handle that, so I'm gonna give you more jobs." And it digs us into this ditch where we're thinking, "I'm so overwhelmed. What am I gonna do?" So what I like to do sometimes is if somebody gives you another task, you can say, "I'd like to do that, but I'm gonna need some help figuring out what to take off of my plate so I can fit that in." And when you phrase it like that, no boss is gonna be like, "No, you have to do all of these tasks." No healthy boss anyway. Normally, they'll say, "Okay, let's take a look at your schedule and figure out how do we get rid of one thing so that you can take on this new task." But to make it abundantly clear, like, I'm a human being and there's only so many hours in the day and I can't do everything. And it's really scary to do that if you've never done that before. If you've always been the person who says yes to everything, that's tough to do. But if you just give it a try, experiment with it and see what happens, and it's probably not going to be as bad as you think. Instead, a manager might be like, okay, let's take a look at your schedule and let's take something off your plate, or you don't have to do that one task anymore. We'll find somebody else to do it.
Yeah, I think it's really important because if you have one role, but you're also taking on another role within that, so you have 2 jobs, right? And you're doing them at the same time in the same department, and you've got all these other tasks happening with that other role that you also participate in, and they come to you with some sort of challenge or something that needs to be completed. being able to step into that and say, actually, I actually have all of these things going on. This is priority right now. And recognizing that there are other people that don't have those same tasks currently, and they're available to actually take that on and complete that task for you. It's really hard to say that, but I think people end up respecting you for acknowledging that what you're capable of doing, because otherwise you're setting yourself up for failure because you may not be able to complete the task, or you might not do it as well as you might have if you had the extra time and just the capacity to be able to get it done. But then you're also recognizing that you have a hierarchy and a structure, and there's other people around you that can support you in that role. But the problem you often run into is most people, they're not going to actively step up and say, "Oh, I'll help you out with that." They're just not.
Yeah, and it gets us into a strange circumstance sometimes because other people ask us for help, and if we always help them, then sometimes we're just reinforcing to them that, "Yes, I will bail you out or I'll always assist you." And then they keep coming to us for more help all the time or to assist them with something. And then the less we delegate tasks, the harder it is to then delegate a task later on because we get so used to doing it or we're the only ones that know how to do it in a certain way, then we don't wanna ask anybody else to do it. So I think it's always important at work to take a step back and just look at the overall picture. All right, here are my priorities. Am I doing those things? Am I feeling burned out? And am I stressed at the end of the day because I don't feel like I was productive enough and I didn't get enough done? Because once you get on that hamster wheel where you feel like you just are never getting your job done,
Yeah,
it's really hard to come back from that.
absolutely. And then you carry that with you into your home life as well, and that creates
Correct.
a whole other host of challenges.
Certainly does, and we're seeing that so much these days where people are just saying, "I'm feeling really burned out and I don't have anything left." And when you feel like there's just no more gas in the tank and you just go home and you flop down on the couch and you don't have energy to do anything fun, of course, that leads to lots of other issues in terms of mental health problems and relationship issues and things that just start to compound your stress.
Yeah, you find yourself in this place of finding new and different ways to cope with.
Right.
So, but then you start ignoring other responsibilities that you have at home, whether that's to family or if you're alone, not paying your bills, you're not working out, you're not showing up for yourself in the way that you know that you should. And then there's all this shame around that because you're not showing up. And it's just like you can't get started. For the person that can't find it within themselves to get started because they're in that place of just dissociating, what would help them out of that?
So I think small steps, have to say, all right, I'm going to go back to going to the gym 6 hours a week and I'm going to start doing all of these other things. You just say, what could I do right now? And a really small step. And it might be, I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to go outside. I'm going to spend some quality time with somebody that I care about. All of those little things start to add up over time, but to just find those little small steps of things that you can do to do right now to start taking back control over your life.
Now we're heading into the holidays, and that should be an exciting time, but I feel like for a lot of people, it's just not because the past week has just been so stressful for so many. Huge disappointment, a huge letdown, and they're watching other people celebrate and be totally happy for the outcome. What can you tell people who are in that place right now where the holidays are coming to be able to shift into that mindset of it's actually a good thing? And how can we invite our family back in to connection with us?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, for people who are struggling to know, what can I control? You can't control the economy, you can't control politics. I can control what goes on inside my house. So, what might that be like? How do I create the most positive environment I can right here at home? And if you're gonna get together with extended family, may need to set some boundaries so we aren't having political discussions over the dinner table or so that we aren't getting into arguments about certain things. So you might set some rules ahead of time and you might have to tell people ahead of time, look, we're not going to discuss politics, we're not going to have conversations about the economy or government or anything like that this year. And if you can't respect that, we're going to ask you to leave. And for some people, that's a reality when it comes to extended family. Somebody might choose not to show up, but try not to dwell on the people who didn't show up and you focus on the people who do.
Yeah, it's really hard because we often carry these expectations of others that they're going to show up and do certain things and act in a certain way, and they're somehow going to be more like us. There was somebody else that made this post the other day, and it was about the word sonder, and it is making room for the idea that other people have a life equally as complicated and full as yours. And I think it's really hard for individuals to really step outside of themselves and create that higher level of empathy to be able to recognize that, oh, you do have a life that branches off in all of these different directions, just like mine.
Yeah.
Instead, we have this little compartment that we put them in the back of our brain, and it's, "I know who you are. I know what you're capable of. I know what you think." It's completely unfair and unrealistic to do that, but that's what we do. So, why do we fill in the gaps of other people with whether it's past information or just limited information and then judge them so quickly and so harshly?
Yeah, it's our brains are hardwired to do that, that we give ourselves a break sometimes and not other people. So if I'm 10 minutes late, I'm like, traffic was bad, and they'll recognize that. If somebody else is 10 minutes late, I'm more likely to think they're irresponsible and they should have left sooner. And so a really good strategy is to just use that phrase that you just alluded to where you say, "Just like me," where you're like, "This person didn't show up because 'cause they're too grumpy about this or that." Just like me, I get that way sometimes too, and when we just remind ourselves, "Just like me," anytime you judge somebody else, you just add, "Just like me." It's a reminder of, "Oh, yeah, I'm actually like that too. I get that way," or, "I feel that same emotion that this person feels," or, "I can certainly be petty and angry sometimes too, just like me."
Yeah. For those who are looking to set boundaries this holiday, what does setting a boundary actually look like? What would it sound like?
So sometimes it's not about even announcing it ahead of time. Sometimes it's just about showing somebody your boundaries. So if you go to somebody else's holiday party and everybody's fighting about politics, you could certainly announce, if this doesn't stop, I'm going to leave in 5 minutes. It's not going to stop, and people aren't necessarily going to change their behavior. Instead, it might just escalate the situation.
Ah, shut up. You can just leave.
Correct. So instead, you can just say, "Come on, kids, time to go," and you walk away
Yeah.
and just end it. Or if you're on a phone call with somebody and they start bringing up things that you don't wanna talk about, whether it's, old family feuds from 10 years ago, or they're complaining about something that has to do with the election, you can easily just say, "Oh, look, this I got something on the stove. I gotta go." You don't have to say, "I'm not gonna have this discussion with you," but if you do that a couple of times, like somebody's at the door, people that quickly get the hint, and you can actually train people. "I'm not gonna talk to you about these subjects," but you don't have to escalate the situation by saying, "We're not gonna do this," or to have a debate about whether it's okay to talk about it. Because sometimes that leads to more arguments where if you say, "I'm not gonna discuss this," and then the other person's all, "We have to. You can't ignore the elephant in the room," and then before you know it, you're arguing about whether or not you have to discuss politics. So, sometimes it's just about showing people, like, "Actually, we're not gonna do this." When it comes to your own house, you get to make the rules. So you can certainly say, "We're not going to do this in my house," or "This isn't a discussion for today," and let people know that. And if you're somewhere else, you can show your boundaries with your feet. And if it's over the phone, you can certainly choose to end the conversation.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because a huge part of this is actually setting a boundary with yourself,
Hmm.
right? That you're going into a situation that could be, I don't want to use the word hostile, but I think everybody gets what I'm trying to say when I say that. Just the opportunity for difficult conversations to occur. And if you step back for a second and actually look at the other person's emotional capacity, you can begin to recognize that it's, you know what, they're actually not going to change.
Right.
It's actually not my job to fix or change them. It's actually not even my problem. So I can actually go there, have a good time, have engaging conversation, avoid other conversations and move into a different room or go outside, go for a walk if things are getting a little crispy
Yep.
inside and just give yourself that opportunity to say, you know what, I'm actually going to set that boundary with myself that when I have that experience, I'm going to go ahead and step out for a second. And it's
Ye-
okay to do that.
It certainly is. Boundaries are all about keeping your inner peace and knowing, like, all right, I'd be proud of myself if I went and got in a heated debate with all of my relatives about all of these things and it turned out ugly. You're not going to change anybody's opinion. So there's really no sense in doing it. So, as you say, you might say, somebody brings up a subject you don't like, you move on to a different conversation with somebody else, or you just offer a compliment, you change the subject, you do these things, but we do better when we have a plan in place, an if then plan. So if I get there and people start doing these things, then here's what I'm going to do: take a walk, talk to somebody else, or I'm going to bring up the weather. You can always talk about the weather. It's been cold out lately, hasn't it? When somebody brings up something that you don't want to discuss and see what happens then. But to know, yeah, this is really about what am I going to do to preserve my inner peace today, to have the best time I can given the circumstances that we're in.
There's another aspect to this where there's always that one parent that wants to have the perfect ideal holiday. And every year is just a lot of stress around the buildup of the holiday. And then the day of, it's you want to offer help. They don't accept help, but it's just like, you wouldn't do it anyways, but we're trying. like, We
Right.
want to help you. So how can we navigate the person that wants to have the perfect or ideal holiday?
I think to just recognize that person is probably under a lot of stress,
Yeah.
that they are valuing the decorations on the table and the perfect food and that sort of a thing. And then just knowing, okay, I can't control the situation. I'm just going to manage my own turmoil or stress that I experience. And if it's stressful, I have a relative, if you were to be in the kitchen with this person when they're cooking, you will hear swear words you've never heard before. And I don't find that enjoyable on a holiday. So I would certainly just not bother to walk into the kitchen. I'd go somewhere else in the house. So I think knowing that again, what's my role here? What are my options? And to know that when we encounter a problem like that, you have two choices. Do I solve the problem or do I solve how I feel about the problem? So it might be I'm going to walk outside, I'm going to go do something else that's about solving the problem. Sometimes it's about solving how I feel about the problem. If we're all eating dinner and there's something that's annoying to me, but I can handle it, what am I going to do? Maybe I'm just going to manage my own inner turmoil with some positive affirmations or mantras. I'm going to close my eyes and take a few deep breaths while I'm
Yeah.
taking a drink of my water, those sort of a things to say, like, how do I control my emotions right now?
Yeah, you can just knock out that physiological sigh, the double inhale in through the nose and the long exhale out. All
Correct.
right. And nobody's going to notice. They're not even going to care that you're doing it. But man, are you going to feel a lot better?
Correct. Rather than getting all worked up and thinking that you have to fix the situation.
It just goes back to emotional capacity and seeing other people with a little bit more empathy than maybe we've had in the past. Because if there's that much stress and frustration or fear, is a lot of what they're experiencing around that holiday. Have you ever taken the time to get curious enough to ask? And obviously, the holiday is not the day to ask for that. But have you ever just stepped back for a second and observed that maybe there's some sort of emotional challenge there, somatic challenge that they're going through, and they might not even be completely aware of it themselves?
That's just it. Sometimes we take things really personal, like
Yeah,
we think it's about us or the person is being a jerk on purpose. For the most part, people do the best they can with what they have. And it might
right.
just be that in this moment, that person, for whatever reason, feels like they have to do this certain thing. And it's difficult for the people around them. But I guarantee they didn't wake up today saying, how do I make this holiday miserable for everybody else? Instead, they might have just lost sight of what's important, or they have different priorities than you do, or their values are a little bit different, or they're just having a bad day when it comes to managing their own emotions.
And it doesn't invalidate. I want people to understand this doesn't invalidate your feelings about how you're perceiving them. But at the same time, I just want you to be able to take a step back and just become the observer for a moment and actually look at people with a little bit more empathy and compassion than what we generally give them. And you might still say, yeah, they still suck. Okay, great. But at least you took the second to observe them with a kind heart and say, okay, what am I understanding here? What's actually happening? And what you begin to realize is, I don't need to change you. I don't need to fix you. I don't need you to be different. I don't need you to do anything. I just need you to show up. I need you to be present with me, have some good hearted conversation. And if you can get that out of that moment, you're good, right? I think there's
Yes.
so many people, millennials and Gen Xers, I see them all the time on social media. I'm so angry at my parents. Okay, I get it, but they're in their 70s or 80s now and they're not going to change. So now what? How are you going to relate to that? What would you tell somebody who's struggling with that part?
I think to know that most people's parents probably did what they knew, either what they grew up learning, what they thought was best. Certainly, there are some people that went through incredibly abusive situations, but even then, like parents who do horrible things, like something's wrong with them. It had nothing to do with you. And just knowing that, and as you say, accepting this is who this person is for their flaws, for whatever reason. If I'm choosing to have a relationship with them ongoing, part of it can just be knowing this is what they did, this is who they are. And it's when we let go of that expectation that they're going to change that we start to heal. When you think,
Yeah,
ugh, I wish that my parents could be better grandparents, for example. There's a grief in that, in knowing that this is who they are. They're gonna call me once a year, or they're not gonna be around for my kids the way that I wish that they were, and accepting that rather than thinking maybe this year will be different or things are going to change. So, part of it's acceptance and then allowing yourself to grieve. Maybe they weren't the mom or dad that you wish that you would have had when you were 7. They weren't the kind of parent that you needed. And then how are you gonna heal from that so that you can do things differently moving forward, so that you can be somebody who tries to leave the world a little bit better than you found it.
yeah.
Maybe you didn't learn all the things you needed to learn, but yet what are you gonna do to try to make it a little bit better?
Yeah, I think a lot of people struggle with this and they certainly hate hearing it, but it's like the work is always your work to do.
Yeah,
So wherever you are triggered, struggling, frustrated, irritated, sad, lonely, depressed, angry, isolated, like that's your work. You have to figure that out. And it's not saying that you can't ask for help. You absolutely should. But at
right.
the same time, you really have to put that focus back on yourself. And when you do, you become more capable, competent, and confident in your own capabilities and how you can relate to other people, and your relationships become so much fuller because you're no longer leading with expectation. You're actually seeing people again with that lens of empathy and compassion, that I'm no longer going to put all these expectations on you and then be disappointed when you can't read my mind. I'm actually just going to allow you to be who you are, and I'm going to be who I'm capable of being, who I'm capable of becoming. I'm going to allow that fullness within me to become what everybody starts to see of me, but I'm also not going to care if you judge me or you get angry with me because I'm changing, I'm different, and then that's making you change how you view me as an individual. And over time, people end up coming back and they say, "You know what? How did you do what you did? How did you become who you are? How can I have a piece of that for myself?" So all those people that used to judge you guys, if you put more effort into yourself, you end up showing them what's possible for them, and they'll hate you for it, but usually around I'm not gonna put a time frame to it, but what I've seen on social media is they hate me in my comments. 6 months later, they come back and I get a message, "Hey, I was just in a really bad spot, but I really appreciate you."
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's just it, that it's really about focusing on how do I heal? How do I change? How do I become somebody who can say, "All right, it wasn't the way that I wanted it to happen. It's not
Yeah.
the childhood I wished I had." But yet, again, you learned something from it, you gained something from it. We can all learn from our experiences in life, and how do you become better despite it or because of it? Or because you went through it? What do you want this next chapter to look like? You can control that.
Yeah, it's what Dr. Kelly Brogan calls victim consciousness.
Hmm.
And I struggled with that for a long time because it's that expectation of others, and I'm so disappointed because you didn't do what I expected you to do.
Right, right.
And then you begin to realize but I'm not doing it either. Maybe there's something I can do. And then you realize just how much power you actually have as an individual.
Yeah, we can't control anybody else. We can influence people, though. Look, I
Yeah.
think we have a huge influence on the people around us. And if you want to be influential, focus on yourself. And when you start to change your behavior, again, it affects the people around you.
So your TEDx talk had 24 million views, obviously resonated with millions of people. What is the single most important takeaway from that TED talk? And can that be applied to the holiday season as well?
Yeah, I think the one of the biggest takeaways is probably that you should only compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to anybody
Ooh,
else. And I think
that's
when we
good.
walk into the holidays, it's a time of year where your aunt that you haven't seen in a year is still not married yet. And like you get all, or your cousin is like now the, I don't know, scientist and doing amazing things in life.
Not
And they're
getting
like,
any younger.
Yeah, and what are you doing?" And so I think it's really important to say, I'm just going to compare myself to who I am, yeah, who I was yesterday, not who I was, who people think I need to be, or anything like that. And just knowing that sometimes, like, we see the changes and we see the progress. You might have done a lot of inner work and you might still not be an astronaut. So your grandmother may not be like bragging about you like she does your cousin, but that's okay. That's not what's important in life. And when you get to be 100 years old and you look back on your life, like what's going to be important to you, and just focusing on like, how do I become just a little bit mentally stronger today than I was yesterday? And when we do that, we can all recognize the amazing things we're capable of doing, but also how far that we've come too.
Yeah, it's also recognizing that our time here is brief.
Mhm.
At at best, I did a video on this recently. At best, I've got 25 Christmases, 25 birthdays, 25 holiday, you're right,
Wow.
at best.
Yeah.
But that's barring any significant events that might occur in your life. And so when we look at all these things that are external to us, they really, for me, begin to lose their power. I just don't care. So
Right.
when we sit here and we talk about politics, guess what? Can't take it with you. Can't do anything with it. You can't fix it, you can't change it, you can't do anything different, but you right now can show up and build and cultivate healthy relationships with other people that you actually care about and care about you. And it might not be the perfect relationship, it might not be the most amazing, but you can have some sort of connection with other people that you want to see the best for and from. So why not choose that instead?
That's powerful too to think of, yeah, do I
It
wanna
is.
spend my 25 Christmases? What did I do?
If
We sure debated politics that year. Nobody looks back on their life and thinks, "So glad I spent that hour yelling and screaming about all the things I thought were right that year." No,
yeah,
nobody does that.
not at all. So what role does gratitude play in mental strength, and how can people use it to navigate the holiday stress?
Gratitude is such a superpower when it comes to everything from how healthy we are, like, people who are grateful live longer. It increases your happiness by 15 to 25%. It helps improves your quality of sleep, like, the list goes on and on. So I think just recognizing, yeah, what am I grateful for on a daily basis could change everything, so that instead of thinking about all the things you don't have, you just focus on, "I'm fortunate today, and here's why." And it might just be the simple things, like a stranger smiled at me and held the door for me today. That was pretty cool. But it's so easy to focus on the other stuff, like the car that cut you off in traffic or the argument you had with somebody else or the rude thing somebody did. But when we start to focus on those things, that's what you'll find in life is you start to get grumpy and irritable and you'll just keep finding more bad things in the world. But if you start to look for the good, things start to change. And I'm not a fan of when people are like, at least it's not as bad as it could have been. Like, that's not really gratitude. Now you're just like trying to pull yourself up or
Right.
minimize your feelings. Like, you can be really sad and be really grateful at the same time, but you don't have to use gratitude to pretend like that wasn't sad or anything like that. And I think during the holidays, one really powerful way to summons gratitude, it's not about being thankful for the gift, but instead, just think about the person who gave you a gift. If
Uh,
you're fortunate enough to get a gift from somebody, just imagine them shopping for the gift or making it for you or picking it out for you. And like when you picture that, like it really s- drums up true gratitude of like people in your life took time to either invite you over for a dinner and they made a meal for you or they took time out of their day to do something kind for you or get a gift for you. That's what real gratitude's about, not just about these new socks somebody gave you, but the person who bought you the socks.
yeah. No, I absolutely love that as an exercise where you're picturing the person perusing TJ Maxx and going through it, trying to find just like the perfect item because they know you, they care about you, and they want to get you something that is going to be something that you actually want and desire. At the same time, they go to the checkout and try to find a card for you. And finding a card, I think, is so intimate
Right.
because you're trying the person, you know who they are and what they're about, you know how much you love and care about them, but we might not always be able to articulate those words to them and have it come out. You feel it and they can see it in your face, but you never actually say the words. And so when you sit there for a half hour trying to find the perfect card, and it's just like, I'm really good for that. I make people cry all the time with their with the cards that I give. But it's just like that's my way of expressing to you that you are important to me.
I love that because a lot of us are awkward when it comes to saying our
Yeah.
feelings to somebody, and you're like, you give a card to somebody that you don't sit down and have these heart to hearts with, but sometimes just putting that in a card and then you don't have to say it yet. It's words that you truly mean, and the other person knows it. Like they feel it when they open a card that's heartfelt like that.
I'm also horrible at this too, and that's the receiving part of it. And it's just
Right.
it's never felt comfortable. I've never liked it. I've always had a hard time with it. And when you're given something and then just being able to receive that, that's a practice that I've had to do over my entire life. Yeah. But when you start doing the work, you begin to realize it's I have to make the room and the capacity to have that type of connection with other people where I'm not only giving because I'm really good at the giving part, but actually receiving at the same time. So if somebody's struggling with receiving, what would you tell them?
I think to know that like the little bit of awkwardness that you feel is like a healthy thing. It's a vulnerable thing. It means that you like want to connect with this person. And so to acknowledge it to yourself, to be like, "Okay, this is really difficult now, but then and I'm gonna take the next step." You look somebody in the eye and you say, "Thank you." And, like, what that does for your relationship when you can do that, and just knowing, like, the slight awkwardness that you feel is probably a really good sign, like, it means that you're connecting with somebody, and that's tough to do, but it can be incredibly healthy, and it might improve your relationship too.
Yeah, it's also the fear and worry that you're just gonna leave anyway.
Correct.
So it's just like when we talk about avoidant attachment, I always try to remind people that everybody has read the book Attached by Amir Levine, but he later on did an interview that said that he would have been more empathetic to the plight of the avoidant. So I always want to remind people of that, that when we get into attachment styles and talking about those things, it's just a way of understanding yourself, who you are, and how you relate to other people. It's not meant to demonize and label. everybody in your life. So, and it ultimately becomes a barrier to connection when you start labeling people with all these things. So please don't do that. But avoidance need love too, and they do want to give that back to you, but they need a little space to be able to do that.
Great points.
Yeah. So looking ahead, first off, did I miss anything for the holidays that you might find to be more important?
I think you got it. Gratitude and boundaries are incredibly important, and if we just kept those 2 things in mind, I think the holidays would go a lot smoother for a lot of people.
So then looking ahead at the new year, as we approach the new year, what's one piece of advice you would give someone looking to build their mental strength in 2025?
I would say to focus on 30-day goals as opposed to a giant New Year's goal. We know that when people set a
Uh,
goal for the new year, they usually fizzle by January
yeah.
18th statistically. But if we set 30-day challenges for ourselves and you might experiment with different things, like the month of January, maybe you decide you're going to do a 30-day gratitude challenge where you just write in a gratitude journal every day about what you're grateful for. Maybe February, you decide that you're going to challenge yourself to do one hard thing a day. For some people, that might be leaving the house. For somebody else, that might be calling somebody they care about and saying kind words. But okay, here's a new challenge. And then I'm not a huge fan of people that make these incredible fitness challenges of I'm going to lose 100 pounds or anything like that. But you might
Right.
decide for 30 days, what am I going to do differently? Maybe I'm going to try to walk for 20 minutes, 3 days a week. And you mark that down on the calendar. So I think if we just made these little changes, experimented with little things we could do, figure out which ones of these things you want to adopt and carry forward and create your own challenge. Maybe it's about saying, I'm going to give up my phone for 4 hours a day just to see if it makes my life better. At the end of 30 days, you'll know if it does or not. And you might decide to carry it forward. If not, come up with a new challenge for next month.
And what happens in the middle of that challenge if I mess up or I don't complete something?
Yeah. So that's just knowing that we all have those days that something just doesn't happen. And that's okay. It's about what you do the next day. And I'm not a fan of the 75-day hard challenge that people were doing for a while, where if you miss one day, you
I've
start back
been
over at 0. No. If we're gonna do a 30-day challenge, you don't have to do it for all 30 days. Maybe you get 22 out of 30. That's amazing. And we're just gonna say, how many days in 30 are you able to do this? And you don't have to do it every day. Tomorrow's a fresh start and try it again.
Yeah, give yourself a little bit of grace. I have done the 75 hard challenge. Great results, but
Yeah.
it's definitely a different level of thinking and way of thinking about that 75-day period that you're giving yourself over to. It's a lot of dedication. So, for those of you who are out there and you're looking for some change physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, I want you to sign up for the 21-day self-love challenge. It's part of the ultimate self-love package that you can find in the link in my bio. So go ahead and do that. Don't miss out and let that be what you start in January 2025. And Amy, I can't thank you enough for being here today. What's next for you and with your work?
So I'm writing a business book. It won't come out until
Oh,
2026, but it'll be about mental strength at work.
nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome
Yeah. Thank
and
you.
so needed. I think a lot of people, what do you think the top 3 challenges are for people at work?
I would say stress, burnout, and difficulty managing emotions.
Yeah, that last one,
Mhm.
former first responder, there's a lot of emotion
Right,
that
right.
happens in all of that. So, no, that's awesome. When's that coming out?
Probably May of 2026, so I'm writing it right now, and then
Okay,
it'll take a while to make it to the shelves.
that's exciting. Are you gonna create content then around that as well
Correct, I
over the
think.
next year?
Yeah, there's so much, that and it really came out of I get hired by a lot of companies who
Sure.
hired me to train them how to be mentally strong, and I get so many of the same questions over and over again from businesses who are saying, "We're struggling. What can you help us with?" So, I'm excited to create that resource.
Yeah, it's always interesting when you start to have conversations with people in the different businesses and at all different levels, whether it's corporate or government. They all seem to struggle in a lot of the same ways. And it comes down to that emotional resilience piece and just knowing who you are, what you're all about, and why you're doing what you're doing is a huge
Exactly.
part, that mission and vision.
I agree.
Amy, thank you so much for being here today. Tell everybody how to reach you and find you.
So my website is Amy Morin, LCSW, as in licensed clinical social worker.com. And you can find information there about my books, my TEDx talk, and my podcast, which is called Mentally Stronger with therapist Amy Morin.
Don't miss out on that TEDx talk, guys. It's well worth it. And I think it's only like 15 minutes.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so worth the 15 minutes. So go listen to that. Do it before the end of the year and prime yourself for 2025. Amy, thank you.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.